He stood in front of the hall mirror, trying to adjust his tie for the third time, even though he knew it was already perfect. His hands were sweating, and the lump in his throat grew with every passing minute. The reflection showed a steady man, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Outside, the sound of chairs being dragged, the murmur of voices, and the scent of white flowers filled the air. Everything was ready. Everything except her. The church was full. Golden lights. The aisle covered with petals, the sound of the choir rehearsing the wedding march for the last time. The engineer looked at his watch and thought about how long it had taken him to get to this moment. He didn't know it, but that watch marked the beginning of something that would completely change the course of his story. When the priest approached, asking if he was okay, he just nodded. Inside, something was bothering him, a small but strange delay. The bridesmaids whispered. The groomsmen exchanged discreet glances. The music stopped, and for a moment the silence seemed louder than any sound. Time passed slowly. 3 minutes, 5. His gaze began to scan the empty aisle, trying to find a sign, anything. His smile was no longer the same. The photographer lowered his camera, confused. Her father was not in the front pew. No one noticed the detail. Yet, the engineer took a deep breath, trying to control his nervousness. He told himself it was just a common delay, but something in the expression of the ceremony organizer made his heart beat faster. She looked at her cell phone and then at the door. Her face lost color. It was at that exact moment that the sound of footsteps echoed. A man rushed in, a piece of paper in his hand. People turned to look at him. The engineer, still motionless, watched the man's face fall. The crumpled note trembled between his fingers, and it was there, right in front of everyone, that the engineer's smile disappeared completely. But what was on that piece of paper was something he could never have imagined, something that not even time could erase. The sound of voices faded until it disappeared. The man with the note was still standing there, in the middle of the hallway, unable to speak. The engineer took a step forward, confused, and held out his hand. The paper was crumpled, damp with sweat. When he opened it, the crooked letters looked as if they had been written in a hurry, as if the person who wrote them was running away from something or someone. He read the sentence 3 times. Each word sounded worse than the last. "I'm sorry. I can't." That was it. No explanation, no reason, nothing that made sense. For a few seconds, his body didn't respond. It was as if the whole world had stopped. And suddenly, his mind began to race in all directions. Had something happened? Had she really left? People began to whisper. Some stood up. Others just watched in silence. Her father bowed his head. The engineer felt a weight on his chest that seemed physical, real. His hands trembled, his throat went dry. That altar, which had once seemed like the beginning of a new life, was now a stage of embarrassment and loneliness. The priest tried to approach him, saying something he couldn't hear. Everything became distant, as if he were underwater. He stared at the empty aisle, waiting for her to appear at any second and say it was a mistake, but no one appeared. The aisle remained empty. The ceremony coordinator began to discreetly collect the flowers, and the photographer turned off his camera. People began to leave, one by one. The engineer remained motionless. He was still holding the note. He stared at the piece of paper as if searching for an answer that did not exist. His heart was beating fast, but without rhythm. Her father, as he left, simply placed his hand on his shoulder. He said nothing, perhaps because there was nothing that could be said. When the hall was finally empty, the engineer walked to the altar and left the note on the table. He stared at the place where they were supposed to exchange vows. There was an overturned cup, remnants of petals, and a silence that seemed endless. It was then that he noticed a small but disturbing detail. Her cell phone was not with her father, nor among the belongings left in the dressing room, and for some reason he knew that this was not just abandonment. The hall was completely empty within minutes. The lights were still on, but they seemed cold, colorless. The smell of flowers began to change, becoming stronger, almost sickening. The engineer sat on the front pew, staring at the floor, while the distant sound of someone dismantling the flower arch mingled with the dry crackling of cables being rolled up. Each noise seemed to push him deeper into a silence that was already too heavy. He observed the details as if he wanted to memorize everything. The white carpet now marked with shoe prints, the candles still burning, melting slowly, the bride's chair empty. Everything that had been prepared with such care now seemed meaningless. It was as if time had stopped there, freezing the scene of a wedding that never happened. A lady from the catering company approached, trying to collect the glasses left on the tables. She looked at him with pity, but he pretended not to see. He just wanted everyone to leave. When the last guest left, the sound of the door closing echoed like a warning. It was all over. He got up slowly and walked to the altar. He ran his fingers over the note left there. The letters were already smudged from being touched. He put the paper in his pocket and stood still for a moment, looking at the empty aisle. He tried to understand at what point everything had fallen apart. Outside, the wind carried remnants of petals and confetti across the sidewalk. The driver who was to take the couple away waited outside, confused. When he saw the engineer come out alone, he asked no questions. He simply tipped his hat in respect. The drive home was long. The car engine seemed too loud, and the sound of the tires on the wet street repeated like an endless clock. He looked out the window, watching people walking hurriedly, going about their routines, unaware of what he had just lost. When he arrived, the house was the same. The lights on, her perfume still in the air, the wedding rings on the table. He sat down on the sofa and remained there, motionless. Time passed, but he didn't notice. Only when his cell phone vibrated with an unidentified message did he move. The screen showed an unknown number and a short sentence. "You don't know the whole truth." That message stayed on the screen for a few seconds, illuminating the engineer's tired face. He read and reread it, trying to recognize the number, the handwriting, any detail. But there was no name. No photo, no clue. Just those 5 words that seemed to carry a weight he still couldn't understand. "You don't know the whole truth." He didn't sleep during the night. The house was plunged into a painful silence. The clock ticked constantly, and every second felt like a drop falling inside his head. The flowers his fiancée had left were beginning to wilt, and their scent mingled with the smell of cold coffee he had forgotten on the table. Everything seemed frozen, as if time had given up passing there. In the days that followed, he avoided going out. He ignored messages from friends and pretended not to hear the phone. The apartment, once prepared for a life together, was now just a repository of memories. There were wine glasses still on the counter, her dress on the hanger in the bedroom, and the wedding invitation stuck to the refrigerator. He thought about throwing everything away, but he couldn't. It was as if, by getting rid of things, he would erase the last evidence that she had existed in his life. Every morning, he asked himself the same question: what really happened? Running away without explanation didn't seem like something she would do. She was organized, methodical, careful, and as painful as it was to admit, he still believed that something didn't make sense. One afternoon, the mailman rang the doorbell. He left the package at the front desk without saying who it was from. The engineer opened it and found a small box with no return address. Inside was a necklace she always wore, and a photograph of the two of them, torn in half. No letter, no note, nothing. His heart raced. He felt like someone wanted to say something, but in a twisted, confusing, cruel way. He thought about going to her family's house, but the fear of being rejected made him give up. That night, his cell phone vibrated again, the same message, the same words. But this time, an extra line had been added at the end, and she's not as far away as you think. The next morning, the engineer woke up with light streaming through the curtains and his cell phone still in his hand. The message from the night before was still there, and he didn't know if it was real or just a figment of his tired mind. His body felt heavy. His head throbbed. He got up without energy, went to the kitchen and let the coffee brew without even noticing the smell. The routine seemed automatic, as if he were living in the silent mode of the world. The doorbell broke the silence. He hesitated before opening the door. On the other side, a woman was holding a box with some folded clothes. It was the teacher, his fiancée's sister. She looked at him with a mixture of discomfort and compassion. She said she needed to pick up the things her sister had left behind. The engineer simply stepped aside and let her in. The air became heavy. He watched her steps around the house, each movement careful, as if she didn't want to touch anything. She went to the bedroom and stopped in front of the hanging dress. She stood silently for a few seconds, taking deep breaths, and then took the dress off the hanger. He noticed her hands shaking, and something about that scene made him uneasy. As she put the clothes in the box, he realized how much the two women looked alike. The same tone of voice, the same restrained gestures. But there was something different in the way the teacher looked at him. It was a look that mixed guilt and curiosity, a look that seemed to hide something. The engineer tried to hide his discomfort. He offered her coffee. She accepted, sat on the edge of the sofa, and remained silent for a while. He noticed that she avoided mentioning her sister's name, as if it were forbidden. When she got up to leave, she left the box at the entrance and said she would come back another day to pick up the rest. The engineer nodded, but a question began to spin in his mind. Why was she, the sister, there? Where were the parents? Why didn't anyone else show up? As soon as the door closed, he noticed something. On the table, among the cups, was a small gold pendant. It wasn't his. And when he picked it up, he realized that the pendant was broken, exactly at the same point where his fiancée's necklace had been torn in half. In the days that followed, the teacher's presence became a constant, even though neither of them had planned it. There was always a simple reason for her to show up, to pick up something she had forgotten, return an item, or deliver a souvenir. The engineer began to realize that he was looking forward to these encounters, even though he wouldn't admit it. The sound of the doorbell, once annoying, now brought a strange kind of relief. At first, their conversations were brief, short exchanges, full of pauses and averted glances. But little by little they began to last longer. He talked about the work he had put aside, about the routine he was trying to resume. She said she taught at a nearby school, that she tried to keep her mind busy, but that she also hadn't slept well since the wedding that didn't happen. The words came carefully, as if the two were walking on something fragile. The atmosphere between them changed slowly, almost imperceptibly. She started bringing coffee, sometimes cake, and the engineer, without realizing it, began to smile again, even if only for a few seconds. At night, he found himself remembering their conversations, the soft sound of her voice, and how her gaze seemed to understand a pain that no one else understood. But there was also guilt. He tried to push away the thought that he was feeling comfortable around the sister of the woman who had left him. It was wrong, confusing, inappropriate, and yet the more he tried to control the feeling, the more it grew. It was a strange calm that came when she was there, and a silent anxiety when she left. One afternoon, while she was organizing some boxes in the hallway, he noticed something curious. There was an old family portrait on the table, forgotten there since the wedding. The teacher looked at the photo for a few seconds and quickly looked away, putting it inside the box with the other things. The gesture was quick, but it did not go unnoticed. The engineer did not ask any questions, but he realized there was something she didn't want him to see, something hidden in those small details, in the silences, in the pauses, in the things she never mentioned. That night, as he turned off the lights, he thought about her expression as she looked at the photo, and he had the feeling that what united them was not only the pain of abandonment, but a secret that had not yet been told. It was a rainy afternoon when she returned. Heavy clouds covered the city, and the sound of rain against the windows filled the apartment. The engineer was sitting in his armchair, reading without paying attention, when he heard the soft ring of the doorbell. When he opened the door, he saw the teacher, wet, with her hair stuck to her face and her eyes looking different. Tired, perhaps. She said she needed to talk. She entered without waiting for an invitation and left her umbrella leaning against the wall. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. She looked around as if seeking courage in her memories. The engineer realized that something was about to happen. The air seemed heavier, as if the whole room was waiting for an answer. She sat down on the sofa and after a few seconds said something he never imagined he would hear. She said she knew about her sister's escape, that she was there when she decided to leave, and that she tried to change her mind, but couldn't. She said her sister confessed to being afraid of not loving enough, afraid of hurting him, afraid of regretting it. As he listened, the engineer felt the ground slowly disappear beneath him. His hands were sweating, his heart was racing. He wanted to interrupt her, but her voice left no room for that. She spoke firmly, with a restrained sadness that seemed to come from a long time ago. She said she tried to find her later but had no further news, that the family didn't know anything either, that everyone preferred silence to shame, When she finished, the sound of the rain grew. Lo, it was a rainy afternoon when she returned. Heavy clouds covered the city, and the sound of rain against the windows filled the apartment. The engineer was sitting in his armchair, reading without paying attention, when he heard the soft ring of the doorbell. When he opened the door, he saw the teacher, wet, with her hair stuck to her face, and her eyes looking different, tired perhaps. She said she needed to talk. She entered without waiting for an invitation and left her umbrella leaning against the wall. The silence between them was thick but not uncomfortable. She looked around, as if seeking courage in her memories. The engineer realized that something was about to happen. The air seemed heavier, as if the whole room was waiting for an answer. She sat down on the sofa and, after a few seconds, said something he never imagined he would hear. She said she knew about her sister's escape, that she was there when she decided to leave, and that she tried to change her mind, but couldn't. She said her sister confessed to being afraid of not loving enough, afraid of hurting him, afraid of regretting it. As he listened, the engineer felt the ground slowly disappear beneath him. His hands were sweating, his heart was racing. He wanted to interrupt her, but her voice left no room for that. She spoke firmly with a restrained odor. The engineer got up, walked to the window, and stared at the raindrops falling on the glass. He didn't know what to feel. Part of him felt anger, not only at his fiancée, but at everyone who had hidden the truth. Another part felt relief, knowing that it hadn't been just a whim, that the abandonment had a reason, albeit absurd. She got up and approached him slowly. She said she never wanted to hide anything, but she didn't know if he was ready to hear it. And then she paused for a long time, looking straight at him. Her gaze said more than any words could. Before leaving, she left a short sentence that there was more to this story. Things he didn't know yet. The engineer stood still, trying to understand what she meant, and for the first time he was afraid not of the pain, but of what he might discover. In the days that followed, something changed. The atmosphere between them was no longer the same. The teacher seemed more at ease, and the engineer no longer hid his desire to have her around. She began to show up frequently, without needing a reason. Sometimes she brought fresh bread, other times she said she was just passing by. He pretended to believe her, but he knew it was more than that, and somehow he liked it. The apartment, once gloomy, began to show signs of life. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, the windows were always open, and the conversations, once brief, now lasted for hours. The engineer was surprised by her lightness, her calmness, the simple way she talked about life. His pain seemed less heavy when she was there. On a sunny afternoon, they sat on the balcony. She talked about her students. He listened, watching the way she gestured. There was something familiar, and at the same time completely new about her presence. His sadness did not disappear, but it began to change shape. It ceased to be an open wound and became something milder, like a scar that no longer hurt so much. Over time, he found himself waiting for the doorbell to ring. When the sound didn't come, the day seemed incomplete. The routine became a silent meeting place. She would show up, he would smile, and everything seemed to make sense for a few moments. But something bothered him. Every time his sister's name came up, she changed the subject. She said that time would solve everything, that the past should not be relived. He pretended to agree, but his doubts grew. He began to think that the teacher knew more than she was saying, and that there was a reason for her silence. One night, she left her purse on the table. Inside was a small envelope with his name written on it. He thought about opening it, but hesitated. It didn't seem like an ordinary oversight. It seemed like a test. He put the envelope away unopened and spent the night awake. The doubt weighed heavier than the loneliness he had felt before. The next morning, the envelope was still on the table. The engineer looked at it as if it were something dangerous. The paper was plain, but his name was written in firm, careful handwriting. He ran his finger over the letters and thought about what it could mean. Curiosity and fear mingled in a way that was difficult to explain. It wasn't just the contents that frightened him, but the possibility of changing everything he was beginning to rebuild. He put the envelope in a drawer and decided not to open it, at least not that day. He tried to follow his routine, but every detail reminded him of her, the sound of her voice, the scent of her perfume that still lingered in the air, the calm way she talked about simple things. The teacher's presence calmed him, but now it also made him uneasy. It was a mixture of desire and guilt that threw him off balance. The visits continued, and with each one, The tension grew in an almost imperceptible way. There were moments when their eyes met and lingered for too long. Other times, the silence between them said more than any conversation. He felt something strong, but tried to deny it. He was afraid of confusing gratitude with feelings, companionship with love. One afternoon, while she was talking about something trivial, he realized that he no longer thought about his fiancée. The pain of loss seemed distant, like an old memory. The teacher now occupied that space, naturally, but that made him feel wrong. She was his sister, the line that should never be crossed. Even so, he knew he was already crossing it. Every time she approached, his mind said, "No," but his body remained motionless. Every time she laughed, his chest tightened in a way he recognized. This was not friendship. It was something he did not want to admit, and she seemed to understand without needing to hear it. One night, as they said goodbye at the door, she hesitated before leaving. Their eyes met and lingered for too long. Neither of them spoke. As she descended the stairs, the engineer felt that something had changed. Something that could not be undone. That night stuck in his mind. The way she looked at him before leaving, the silence between them, the soft sound of her footsteps going down the stairs, everything seemed to have a new weight. The engineer didn't sleep. He spent hours wondering if he should have said something, if he should have stopped her from leaving. His mind replayed the same scene over and over, as if searching for a hidden answer in her gestures. The next day, she came back. She said she had forgotten her purse, but he realized it was just an excuse. There was something different in the air, a caution that tried to disguise discomfort. They had coffee on the balcony talking about trivialities, but the tension was clear. The sound of traffic outside contrasted with the silence between them. Each pause seemed to carry everything that was left unsaid. When she got up to leave, he walked her to the door. They stood face to face. Too close. He could smell her light perfume, feel the warmth of her breath. Neither of them knew what to do, but the moment seemed to demand a response. She looked down, and without thinking, he touched her arm. The touch was quick, hesitant. Even so, it was enough. Time seemed to stand still. Her gaze rose slowly, and what was there was not surprise. It was something she already knew would happen. His first impulse was to pull back, but she didn't move. And for a moment, what had been avoided for so long simply happened. A restrained, tense kiss, full of fear. Neither of them closed their eyes. When they pulled apart, the silence grew even stronger. She took a deep breath and said she had to go. He didn't answer, just watched her until she disappeared down the hallway. As soon as the door closed, he realized his heart was beating wildly, not out of guilt, but out of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Life. But along with that feeling came the realization that nothing would be simple anymore. He knew that gesture would change everything, and that, from then on, any choice would have consequences he couldn't yet imagine. Sometimes a single moment is enough to break what seemed intact. The following days were confusing. The engineer tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the memory of that kiss kept coming back, in her gestures, in her silence, in the way she looked at him when she returned to his house. Everything was different, even though they both did their best to pretend otherwise. The teacher began to show up less often, and when she did, she spoke little. The conversations, once light-hearted, now had long and uncomfortable pauses. They avoided looking at each other for too long, but one careless glance was enough to change the atmosphere between them again. The engineer wondered if she regretted it, and as much as he tried to convince himself that he should also distance himself, part of him wanted to relive that moment just one more time. One afternoon, she showed up with puffy eyes. She said she needed to deliver her sister's last belongings and that she would not be coming back. He nodded, trying to appear indifferent, but when he saw her bent over, organizing the boxes on the floor, he felt an impulse he could not control. He knelt beside her. The two remained silent, so close that they could hear each other's breathing. She lifted her face, and their eyes met. There was no more room for doubt. What had been contained exploded without warning. This time the kiss was different. There was no hesitation, no guilt. It was a gesture full of urgency and truth. Afterwards she cried. She said she shouldn't, that she couldn't, but he held her and asked her to stay. The sound of rain began to fall outside, and the world seemed to drift away. For a few hours, time did not exist. It was as if they had both forgotten who they were and what that meant. When morning came, she dressed in silence. She said that no one could know, that what happened would remain between them. He wanted to ask why, but he didn't have the courage. He just watched as she left, taking the broken necklace he had found days before. On the table was the envelope he never opened, the same one, now with something new scribbled on the front, a short word written by her before she left. "I'm sorry." From that day on, the apartment became silent again. The mornings seemed longer, and the sound of the clock became unbearable. The engineer tried to concentrate on his work, but his mind always returned to her, to what they had experienced and what remained unanswered. The note with the word "sorry" was still on the table, and every time he passed by, he felt the same tightness in his chest. For days, he heard nothing from her. No messages, no visits. He tried to pretend he accepted it, but the emptiness was evident, and deep down he knew that what bothered him was not the distance, but the feeling that something had been left unfinished, as if a truth was about to be told, but she had backed away at the last second. One night, he received a call. It was her number. On the other end, her voice was shaky, different. She said she couldn't go on anymore, that what they had was a mistake, and that she was leaving town. Before he could say anything, the call dropped. He tried to call back, but the phone was already off. In the days that followed, he tried to move on. He left the house, came back late, avoided places that reminded him of the two of them, but nothing worked. Her absence was more present than anyone else's presence. He began to realize that the pain was different now. It was no longer the abandonment of his fiancée. It was the loss of the woman who made him feel something again after all. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope had no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a single paragraph. "I needed to protect you. There are things you would never understand, and maybe it's better that way. Take care of yourself." There was no signature, just a small gold pendant, the same one she had dropped on the first day she appeared. The engineer stood still, holding the object, trying to decipher what those words really meant. Guilt, doubt, love, everything mixed together in a shapeless confusion. And then he noticed something that made him shudder. The necklace was now whole, without the cut that had been there before. Someone had repaired it, but who? And why? Time passed slowly, but the feeling that something remained unfinished only grew. The engineer began to avoid the apartment. He spent his days at work, went out at night for walks, and returned only when exhaustion overcame him. Even so, silence awaited him at the door. It was the same as before, but now different. It had the sound of what was left unsaid. A month later, he received a brown envelope at the front desk. Inside was an invitation. The name printed at the top took his breath away for a moment. His teachers. The invitation was simple, for a discreet ceremony in a small church in the neighboring town. No name of the groom, no details, just the date and time. For a moment he thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of him. On the appointed day he drove there. His heart was beating wildly, and the road seemed endless. When he arrived, the church clock showed the same time that months earlier he had been abandoned at the altar. The door was ajar. He entered slowly, quietly. The interior of the church was simple, lit only by the late afternoon light. There were no guests at the altar, only her, in a light-colored dress, no flowers, no veil, alone. She turned when she saw him. Neither of them spoke for a few seconds. Her gaze was calm but firm. She said there was no other man, that the invitation was not a mistake. It was a request. She said she wanted to say goodbye to the past in a clean way, in the same place where he had lost everything. She wanted that moment at the altar to no longer be remembered as the end of one story, but as the beginning of another. The engineer approached, not knowing what to say. She reached out her hand and asked him to stand beside her. There, before the same altar, with no witnesses, no promises, just the two of them, silence was the answer. For a long time they just stood there, looking at each other, and then she took a deep breath and said, in a firm voice, that she would not run away anymore, that what she felt was real, and that it didn't matter what others thought. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, trying to understand if this was a new beginning or just the end of something that should never have started. Outside, the church bell rang once. Do you think that moment was forgiveness or just the last goodbye? After that, time seemed to dissolve. Neither of them knew for sure how long they had been inside the church, nor if they were waiting for an answer. The engineer looked at her face, now serene, without guilt or fear, and felt that somehow this ended everything that had begun on the day of the wedding that never happened. She took a step forward, touched his hand, and simply said that she didn't want to run away anymore, that she had tried to fight the feeling, but couldn't anymore. She said that love doesn't choose the moment or the person, and that sometimes fate confuses the paths just to show what really matters. He remained silent, not knowing what to do with his feelings. It was no longer anger or doubt. It was a mixture of acceptance and peace, a strange relief. The weight he had been carrying since she left seemed to gradually disappear, and when he realized it, he was holding her hand tightly. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The light filtered through the stained glass windows, coloring the floor with soft shades of orange and gold. They stood there, side by side, without promises, without plans, no forever. Just the moment. Later, they walked together to the church door. She stopped on the steps and looked at him one last time. She said she didn't know what the future would bring, but that for the first time, she felt at peace. He smiled slightly. He said that her love had healed something he didn't even know was still hurting. She then placed the pendant in his hands and asked him to keep it. She said that this object represented what they had experienced, something broken but carefully rebuilt, a symbol that even what is born of chaos can have a purpose. And there, without kisses, without words of farewell, only the sound of the wind passing through the church door, each went their separate ways. As she walked away, he looked at the altar one last time. There was no pain, just a silent question that would stay with him forever. Does true love come from meeting someone, or from what's left after everything falls apart? What do you think? Was their love a cure, or just a beautiful way to not feel alone? If you made it this far, don't forget to leave your comment, your like, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you very much and see you soon.